Hello everyone, welcome to Lightcast webinars. Really excited to have you with us today. We have with us today Lightcast's Lester Biddle, who is our account director for the communities and government section of our business. If you have any questions during the course of the webinar, put them in the control panel in the questions box and we will endeavour to get back to those at the end of the presentation. If not, we will respond to you later on in the follow-up. We will be sharing the recording and the slides today in a follow-up email, so keep your eyes open for that. And so without any further ado, I'll hand over to you, Lester. Hi, Lester.
Hi, Debbie. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar that's all around cybersecurity skills in the UK. Thank you for joining. As Debbie said, if you do have any questions, do put them in the function there and we will get round to answering those later on during the presentation. So I'm very pleased today that we've got a guest speaker with us, Sam Donaldson from Perspective Economics. I'll be introducing him shortly, who's going to talk us through the content of his report from Cybersecurity Skills. Just before we do that, just to really go through a few points about who we are and Lightcast. So we were formerly known as MZ Burning Glass until recently when we changed our name to Lightcast, and still quite frequently I'm in meetings where I hear people talk about MZ or Burning Glass or MZ Burning Glass, but we are now Lightcast. So who are we? What do we do? Well, our mission is really about helping you to take away the guesswork about the labour market and shining a light on what is happening historically, but also to the present time, to allow you, our customers, and other interested parties, local enterprise partnerships, education establishments, communities, and employers to understand the landscape and make better informed decisions, connecting the knowledge, the skills development, the careers planning and advice, to help unlock the power and development and to improve the skills and overall well-being and quality of life of people. So how do we do that? Well, we're here to help you. So we have structural data. So we use the structural data as the official statistics, which basically is the building blocks of local data to help understand over time the foundation of what is happening being locally and nationally, to help you understand that. And then from there we get the big data, which is in the form of our job posting analytics and professional profiles to help us illuminate in much greater granularity a real-time view in terms of what employers are seeking through their hiring activity and via job postings, and also what professional profiles look like to help spotlight the supply. These key data points are critical in helping understand the labour market. And then to help that, we have a range of solutions that can help you access the data and manipulate this further to allow you to get that better level of granularity. If you're looking, depending on what you're looking for, that could be, for example, geographical, specialist or occupation. This can either be via our online platforms or via an API in Snowflake using our online system analyst, or our own applied research and consultancy services that allow you to benefit from the expertise we have internally. So there's a vast variety of things that you can do with our data and our platforms to help you understand better. Or indeed, as we will shortly hear from Sam, how he's taken our data and use that to inform himself and his organisation in further understanding the landscape for cybersecurity skills and putting it into his report. So I would like to introduce Sam now. Sam is one of our customers and he's a director from Perspective Economics. He's a leading economic analyst and he's derived studies that quantify the economic value, capacity and potential of emerging sectors across the UK, including life sciences, biotechnology, big data, and of course, cybersecurity. So Sam, welcome, and I'll now hand over to you to talk us through your findings from the report.
Thank you very much, Lester, and thanks for having me today. So yes, as Lester says, I'm going to just kind of take the next 15-20 minutes just to go through some of our research looking at cybersecurity skills in the UK. Next slide, please. But just before I kind of do that, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a quick background as to the background to Perspective Economics. So we are a data-driven economic consultancy firm, as Lester says. We've been around now for nearly 5 years. We work right across the UK. We also work in Europe, the US, and the Middle East. And essentially what we do is we focus on emerging areas and emerging sectors right across different economies. So real specialism in sector studies and regional studies, so trying to understand what is actually going on in the ground with respect to emerging technologies. We also do a lot of work in kind of economic strategies, labour market analysis, which again is kind of where the Lightcast tool is just so incredibly valuable to us, business cases and impact evaluations. So trying to really understand at a very granular level what's happening within domestic and regional economies. We can really split our work into three areas. As I mentioned, we'll be talking about cybersecurity on this call, but we also do a lot of work looking at the labour market for artificial intelligence, areas such as online safety and countering online hate. We do a lot of work in futures and horizon scanning and digital innovation. And we also do quite a bit of work in adjacent areas such as health and life sciences, green energy, climate and materials are certainly areas that we're finding of increasing significance. And on the right-hand side, again, the research I'm going to talk to you about today was on behalf of the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. But we also do a lot of work with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, DIT, Government Officer Science, and a number of LEPs and local authorities right across the UK. So next slide, please. So just today, what I'm going to do is take you through how we actually sought to measure the UK cybersecurity skills landscape in collaboration with DCMS and Ipsos using the Lightcast platform. I'm also going to talk to you just a little bit about why we used the Lightcast platform and some of the metrics we were able to derive from the platform. Again, cybersecurity is an incredibly challenging area to define and to map, so I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll go through some of the core findings and then ultimately talk about why labour market data is actually quite useful, not just in terms of gathering statistics and data, but actually for informing policy and informing real world interventions. Next slide, please. So just to kind of give a little bit of background to the research that we've been leading for the last 3-4 years with DCMS. Every year DCMS publishes a report called Cyber Skills in the UK. We've been feeding into that report since sort of 2019. That report is published annually. It was published in January of this year and will be published again January next year. To kind of give you a little bit of profile as to that study, some people may be familiar with it, some people may not. But what that study essentially tries to do is understand these kind of 5 questions on the right. So what actually is the cybersecurity role and how many roles are in demand? Ultimately, as many people will hear, cybersecurity is an area in which there's huge demand and not an awful lot of supply. So how can we try to understand what's actually going on within different labour markets across the UK? Secondly, how is that demand changing over time, which I'll touch upon in subsequent slides. Obviously, cybersecurity is a huge growth area for the UK economy, and being able to understand exactly what employers are looking for is incredibly valuable to do. Where is demand located across the UK? So again, there are hot spots of activity and indeed cold spots of activity across the UK, but trying to go back to policymakers and to understand exactly what's happening across at least the 12 UK regions, but we actually break that down to travel to work areas using the Lightcast platform. So really trying to understand which cities and towns are particularly finding high demand for cybersecurity roles. What levels of experience and technical skills are in demand? Again, trying to understand what employers exactly are looking for so that people can be trained up with relevant skills and relevant technical background. And ultimately, and this is kind of where this all matters, how can this data ultimately inform skills interventions? So kind of prior to 2019, we had been working alongside Ipsos MORI to interview and to survey and to do very traditional research techniques, trying to understand what was happening within the cybersecurity labour market. But what we found was that actually our team had been tracking the size of the cybersecurity sector in a separate piece of work since 2017. So we knew a couple of thousand employers right across the UK that were looking for cybersecurity roles. And in 2019, we made the informed decision to bring in the use of Lightcast data to try to understand how vacancy data could actually provide much deeper insight into what demand was happening for cybersecurity skills across the UK economy. So kind of layering on those strands of research, speaking to employers, trying to find out exactly what's happening on the ground, but enriching that with very strong quantitative data as well. Next slide, please. So Our first kind of port of call for this study was actually defining what a cybersecurity role is or isn't. And that was no simple task. We did a lot of work with DCMS and the National Cybersecurity Centre to try to understand what roles industry actually would consider to be in scope for this. Cybersecurity roles currently at the time do not neatly map into standard occupational classification codes, which are sort of industry standard codes for what people do. So again, if you're looking at something like an architect or an accountant, that will quite happily marry into those codes. Cybersecurity roles are so incredibly broad and complex that actually what we have to do is create a very bespoke search strategy to identify those roles. So using Lightcast, we were able to identify an initial population of roles, looking at things like security engineers, security consultants, SOC analysts, and worked very closely with industry and government to create a search strategy to do that. We also found several hundreds of job titles across the UK economy that were not commonly recognised as cybersecurity roles, but still required some of those skills. So things like network architects or project managers that needed to have some awareness of risk, regulation, compliance, some of those consistent themes. And the really valuable thing, again, using the Lightcast platform, was that we were able to include a bespoke search strategy that essentially included and excluded over 600 keywords, so a really complex search strategy that was able to kind of pinpoint what type of roles were actually in scope for our study. And what we were able to identify just at the bottom there was more than 663,000 relevant job postings since 2016 to 2021. So a really, really rich data set of over 500,000 jobs that we were able to look at and analyse to try to understand what was happening within the regional market. Next slide, please. So just kind of why Lightcast and why some of the metrics that we were able to look at were so important to us as a research organisation. So we had those 663,000 job postings in scope. We were able to look at those and say, yes, these appear to be in scope. They appear to be hitting the right terminology and the right text and the right skills parameters. But ultimately, this meant that we could actually go back to our client, DCMS at the time, and start to really unpick some of the metrics that we're most interested in, which I'll take you through shortly. So things like how many job postings are there in the UK on a month-by-month basis? So is demand going up? Is demand going down? Are wider trends like, for example, at the point of COVID-19 in March 2020, we saw a really significant drop in the number of jobs in demand. So trying to be able to respond in real time to what was actually happening within the economy and demand for skills. We're able to look at geographic locations across the UK for job postings. So not only are we able to look at the 12 government office regions, we can drill right down to areas like travel to work areas and local authority level as well. So trying to really understand who the key employers are across different parts of the economy. We were able to do a really deep analysis as well using natural language processing, looking at some of the job titles that were in scope to analyse which jobs were actually most in demand and therefore which areas might training providers or universities have to consider when actually training people up in cybersecurity skills. And we're also able to look at the employers, the industries, the experience and education and skills that are being demanded, and often the figure that people always jump to, what the salaries actually are, what the salary bands are, trying to understand. As people will very well know, cybersecurity is a very high-paying profession, but being able to really drill down into where those high-value jobs actually are and in what disciplines. So next slide, please. So just to kind of take you through the findings, next slide again, please. So I'm just going to take you through sort of the top half a dozen top-end findings. Again, these are all included in the Cyber Skills in the UK Labour Market Report for 2022. We're just going to take you through the top-end findings. So one of the main kind of focuses, as I mentioned, is being able to track the number of job postings on a monthly basis. So the chart on the left-hand side shows how we were able to track the number of technical and what we called enabled job postings as well, so jobs that require some cybersecurity skills. We're able to track the number of job postings month by month. What we found in 2021 was that there were over 4,400 technical cybersecurity vacancies posted each month in 2021. But if we track that back, right the way back to 2016 and really on from then, we were able to go back to DCMS and be able to report on how demand was changing over time. So using that real-time data, what we essentially were able to do was track how in March 2020 demand for cybersecurity professionals dropped off a cliff, as it did in many industries, as a lot of employers were very uncertain about the prospects at the point of COVID-19 lockdowns. But what we saw was really between March 2020 and September 2020, a recovery period as employers started to find confidence to take more staff on, started to be able to move to remote working. And in the last 12 months, and before that, we've seen a real growth mode essentially kicking off. So we've seen the number of vacancies increase by 40% in 2021, and by similar proportion to this year to date in 2022. So really being able to give that real-time data to understand what's happening on the ground. Next slide, please. Regional analysis is also a really critical part of our work. So not just understanding what's happening right across the UK at an absolute level, but understand exactly what's happening within regional geographies, and to be able to look at that not only in terms of the absolute number of job postings within a regional economy, but also inform location quotient analysis. So essentially trying to understand the question of, is cybersecurity a really important area for a particular local economy relative to the size of its economy? And the map on the left-hand side shows that we were able to use Lightcast data to essentially map the hotspots of relative demand for cybersecurity professionals right across the UK. So some areas we would expect to see areas like Cheltenham, Greater London, Bristol, that are very, very high in demand for cybersecurity professionals. But also we're able to look at areas like Edinburgh, Leeds, Belfast, Manchester, and this has all been really important for UK policymakers, particularly with the levelling up agenda. On the right-hand side, then, we are able to also segment these job postings by average salary paid for cybersecurity professionals. So unsurprisingly, London sort of leads the way in terms of average salaries paid, just under £70,000 average salary advertised for a cybersecurity professional role. The UK average is just over £60,000. And as you work your way through the regions, you'll see slightly lower average figures. But again, these are incredibly important because what they do demonstrate is really quite consistently across regional economies. The average salary for a cybersecurity professional is about twice the median private sector salary within any given region. So from a levelling up perspective and from a trying to increase regional prosperity, really, really valuable having that regional pay data that comes through Lightcast. Next slide, please. In terms of some of the job titles that are also in scope, so again, we were able to take the top 200 job titles from the Lightcast platform and to code and classify these into sort of 10 top areas. Again, this has been incredibly useful for DCMS and for a number of universities actually to understand what roles exactly individuals are going into. I'll not go into those in too much detail on this call, but essentially 1 in 3 cybersecurity jobs relates to security engineering, software engineering, about 1 in 5 on the analyst side, 1 in 7 security managers, about 1 in 10 on sort of the consultancy side as well. Less explicitly, you see areas like penetration testing and data protection, although they are areas in which skills are more rapidly being sought right across the board in the UK economy. Next slide, please. And also then being able to take where we can, using the Lightcast data, we were able to code and classify employer names against standard industrial classification and other sectoral codes. So we were quite readily able to identify which industries were looking for cybersecurity professionals. And again, what we kind of found was that 1 in 5 were kind of coming through large consultancy firms. So certainly employers like PwC and Deloitte, very, very high demand for cybersecurity professionals, particularly joined on to sort of audit and risk industry as well. The actual IT sector itself kind of goes without saying, but essentially that kind of covers IT employers and cybersecurity employers. But we were also able to do a deeper dive into other areas like aerospace and defense, which is very important to a number of regional economies. And also another benefit of the Lightcast platform is that we're able to identify public sector employers, which is often quite tricky to do using more official private sector data as well. So really having that breadth as to where the demand for cybersecurity professionals is coming from into organizations at an organizational level. Next slide, please. In terms of the experience then, this is another area that's really, really important for anyone kind of working in the area of skills and training. We were able to break down where employers were asking for a certain minimum level of experience from a candidate. And again, quite often what you see within cybersecurity is that there's a real push for retraining people in cyber, getting people into cybersecurity from new disciplines and new areas. But what we found was that only 1 in 4 job postings actually were accepting sort of a minimum of 0 to 2 years experience, which essentially is entry level. So we find that actually employers on the whole, 59% of them are asking for at least 3 to 5 years experience. And that's a really good indication to have as to employers quite often say that they are willing and able to train people up, but we're essentially, when they were going out to market, are looking for experienced candidates. And from a skills perspective and from a labour market perspective, there's that real challenge of how do you reconcile the need to bring in entry-level talent into organisations with employer demand for typically 3 to 5+ years experience. So this has been a measure that we've been continually tracking year on year with DCMS using the Lightcast platform to try to understand what is actually being done at an entry level to get more people into cybersecurity, and could employers be theoretically nudged to bring in more entry-level talent to allow them to get to that stage of experience that's obviously going to be needed to plug the skills gap. Next slide, please. Just kind of a couple of other slides to cover, just in terms of some of the really interesting data we're able to pull through from Lightcast. So on education and certification side, this essentially is where an employer is requesting a minimum level of education in a usually in a bachelor degree or postgraduate degree sense, but also some of the certifications that are requested, which are a little bit of an alphabet soup of certifications, but essentially where employers are looking for particular minimum certifications coming through. What we find that was really kind of, again, quite interesting and quite salient to the past point was that essentially over 90% of jobs that are put out by employers are requiring at least a bachelor's degree. Actually, 8% of them require a minimum of a postgraduate degree. So again, from a policy consideration, there's this real kind of drive to see, could people be brought in at an early level, possibly through things like apprenticeship schemes, through foundation degrees? Are there other ways and means by potentially dropping those requirements around degree or postgraduate degree that could help to unlock further talent? Or indeed, is that a necessary part of actually having people kind of coming through into the industry? On the right-hand side, we also find that typical certifications that are being requested by employers, interestingly, and the most interesting statistic that's there is that 2 out of 5 job adverts that set out a certification minimum are requesting CISP, which is the Chartered Institute for Security Professional qualification. That requires at least 5 years experience typically, so it kind of shows the path dependency that's starting to find its way into job adverts within cybersecurity that potentially could be considered to bring more people in. Next slide, please. And just lastly, and this is always one of the more important ones, you can always see people doing the sums in their head, thinking about whether they should get a job in cybersecurity when they see these slides. But essentially, across the last 12 months of 2021, the average advertised salary for a cybersecurity job, as I mentioned earlier, is just over £60,000. Looking at it in 2022, that's actually up to like £64,000 so far this year. So again, really, really strong, one of the highest paying jobs within the UK economy. Another advantage of Lightcast was being able to segment into salary bands. So we actually were able to find kind of median and modal forms of pay. On the chart on the left-hand side, you'll see that 1 in 7 jobs in cybersecurity that's advertised are paying more than £90,000. So a real demand to pay quite substantial salaries, particularly for senior levels of experience across the UK. And I mentioned the regional breakdown in pay earlier as well. So next slide, please. Next slide again. So I'm just going to take you through what actually some of the impacts of those statistics were. Obviously, having statistics is great and having that data is really important. But this ultimately has led to a real influence in cybersecurity workforce policy, particularly from DCMS, and also from, like I said, Department for Education, and by a number of LEPs and local authorities and devolved regional governments as well that have taken some of these findings and used these to influence workforce design and skills policy. So kind of through this research, we were really able to understand the demand for cybersecurity talent across the UK. We were also able to identify some really key employers and businesses. And the questions that were put back to us, quite rightly, are employers able to secure the right forms of talent? Are people actually aware of some of the training and opportunities that actually exist in cybersecurity? Would there be demand for retraining and reskilling across the UK? So if we put a scheme out, would people actually be interested in taking that on? And would these interventions actually benefit those entering the labour market? So next slide, please. So that allowed us as researchers to kind of do a supply and the demand analysis to try to match up what we find with the Lightcast data against what's actually happening on the ground with respect to the number of people in the UK that have those relevant skills. So we delivered a further study alongside DCMS called Understanding the Cyber Recruitment Pool in the UK. And essentially that sought to take this perception of a skills gap in the UK and to actually apply a quantification to that figure. So we worked with, not only working with Lightcast, but we worked with the Higher Education Statistics Authority and the Department of Education to look at some of the inward supplies, trying to understand how many people is the UK actually currently training up in cybersecurity degrees, computer science courses, in conversion courses. We also tried to understand how many people are currently working in cybersecurity roles through other modelling that we did. We also wanted to understand how many people are actually leaving cybersecurity roles. So quite often when you see a job vacancy, that can be, sometimes that's additive, someone looking for a new job, and sometimes it's replacing someone that's previously left that organization. So how many people are actually leaving cybersecurity roles in the UK? What do those flows look like? And then using Lightcast data with all of that in consideration to understand how demand has changed, how demand is changing for cybersecurity professionals. Just next slide, please. And what that meant we were able to do with DCMS is to really drive down into understanding the quantified skills gap for cybersecurity professionals in the UK, using those agreed definitions of cybersecurity professionals. So we were able to map inflows into the UK economy, so number of graduates, number of conversion courses, number of people studying apprenticeships, that kind of thing, into the cybersecurity labour market in a 12-month period. We were able to estimate the size of the cybersecurity workforce in the UK across private and public sector that we estimate is between about 110 and 150,000 people, depending on how you classify that. We were also able to understand the estimated percentage of people leaving the sector, either due to retirement or leaving for other things. And we were able to use the Lightcast data to also inform where growth was heading, what sort of demand from employers looks like. And this gave us a statistic that is just at the very bottom of the screen, where we estimate that there's a need essentially every 12 months in the UK for an additional 14,000 people to be trained in cybersecurity or brought into cybersecurity roles every year. So stripping that right back in terms of the language, what that really means is UK universities, UK retraining schemes could train up an extra 14,000 people, and we reckon that employers would actually have the demand to take those people on. So that's kind of our quantification of the skills gap, that the UK can do a lot more on supply because demand is so high to get more people into cybersecurity roles and get people into the profession. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of some of the key findings. Just go on to the next slide. So just to kind of give that final kind of view of impact and where Lightcast data has been so valuable in being able to track this sector. Ultimately, the data that we've been able to use has been used to help to design skills interventions right across the UK. We've spoken with a number of different LEPs and regions as well about using that estimation of the gap to inform skills interventions. So for example, running a retraining scheme with a accredited provider for say 200 young people, getting them into cybersecurity and knowing the demand is there to get people in to employment with some success. We can estimate the extent of the perceived skills gap and segment, and we also have that full evidence base on a real-time basis that can be used to track the performance of the labour market and the sector going forward. Some of the links to those reports are all included there as well. I think my contact details are also on the next slide. But as I say, that's just a whistle-stop tour. I'm happy to hand back over to Lester and happy to take any questions or any comments on that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sam. That was extremely informative and very, very interesting. We have got a couple of questions, which I'll just run through now. But if you've got any more, please do put them in the chat. We've got about another 10 minutes. So if there are any more questions, please fire them over. But the first question, Sam, that's come in is, what region do you think needs the most input in terms of regional conferences being run?
That's a really, really good question, and I hope I don't offend anyone depending on what I say with the regional analysis. I think one of the things that's really interesting with respect to the UK cybersecurity, both sector and the labour market, is actually just the breadth that exists in terms of different strengths and different capabilities. If I was to point at a couple of regions that I think either are benefiting from conferences or could benefit from conferences, I'm not saying this because I'm biased because I'm from Northern Ireland, but I think Northern Ireland is a really good case in point where there's a very strong cybersecurity cluster that has developed, and it will be hosting the National Cybersecurity Conference, Cyber UK, next year. Wales has also benefited from the Cyber UK conference as well. It was held earlier this year. I think also areas like the northwest of England have shown really significant growth in the last 2-3 years, particularly among not necessarily traditional cybersecurity employers, but larger tech employers that are looking to secure their operations. So kind of companies like Skybet and some of the larger consultancies, particularly predominant in the northwest and even into regions like Yorkshire. But to give a little bit of a comment, I think this data is so valuable, I think, because being able to give that regional depiction of where the strengths are and understand who key employers are, you can kind of tilt and tailor those conferences and events so that when you're talking about cybersecurity, you're talking about cybersecurity for a purpose, so cybersecurity for professional services or cybersecurity for national defense, and you can tailor that with regional economic strategies as well. So hopefully that gives a little bit of an answer to that one.
Perfect, brilliant, thank you. Another one is around the trend. So over the last few years, have you identified the trends getting better, worse, staying the same in terms of the skills gaps? Is there much movement? Are we seeing sort of more confidence in building here, or things staying static? What's the landscape really like over the last few years?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we've been tracking the skills gap since 2020, so we kind of have the last 2.5 years of data on that. It's a mixed picture because the size of the quantified gap in the last 2 years has actually slightly increased. So what we found was that I used a figure on that last slide of about 14,000 people. In the year before, it was about 11,000 people. So we've actually seen the size of that supply gap increase. But it's a slightly mixed picture because, as I kind of talked about earlier, you have to try to understand regional demand for cybersecurity roles and then regional supply. Regional demand has been very, very hot particularly in the last 2 years. So not only cybersecurity businesses looking for talent, but also businesses right across, or public sector organizations right across the spectrum, looking to bring in the same pool of talent. So you've got a lot more demand, a lot more concentrated demand for cybersecurity professionals from more employers taking those employment decisions a little bit more seriously, particularly things like GDPR and also some of the exposure to breaches that's come in. But on the other side, on the supply side, we've actually seen some really positive signals about the increase in supply that's coming through as well. So some of our early indicative data from Higher Education Statistics Authority in the last number of months suggests that the number of graduates in cybersecurity related roles has increased by about 30% in the last year. The number of students studying computer science has also gone up by about 15%. So we are making some of the right directions in the right way, but it's continually this supply goes up, but demand's going up even further, and the skills gap increases. So I think it's a movable feast, I guess, that different regions can try to get right. But obviously, anything that can be done to increase supply of getting people in at entry level is increasingly important, because that actually allows for retraining of people who are maybe underemployed or need to try to find a new discipline to get into. That's, I think, where there's some particularly interesting value at a regional level.
Perfect. We've got another question just in. Have you managed to record any data from the service leaver industry and getting them retraining with charities like Tech Vets?
Yes, so we have a little bit of data on things. So TechVets have actually been one of the organizations that we've spoken to in the past and have some really, really good data from them. We do provide some internal statistics, and again, we'll pick this up afterwards if there's of interest, but we do have some internal statistics on the number of, sort of military and ex-veterans retraining into cybersecurity, and it's a really, really important area. The Career Transition Partnership statistics that come out every year do help to track the number of veterans moving into sort of IT roles every year. It's significant, but it could be higher. So I think those kind of schemes that help to get ex-vets, ex-military into cybersecurity roles, there's still a lot more that can be done, and there are a lot of conversations being had around that, simply because they have, in quite often, a number of cases, brilliant skill sets for particularly SOC analyst roles, threat intelligence roles, in particular. So definitely more to do on that front.
Perfect. I just wanted to pick up on something. I think that's all the questions at the moment, but I just wanted to pick up on, you were talking about the entry requirements, and I wondered if there was any, or whether you've seen anything towards, obviously we're now seeing more degree apprenticeships coming through, and you talked about bachelors and higher qualifications, but is there any indication that degree apprenticeships are going to get some recognition there, do you think?
Yes, there is. So again, this is another area that, and again, there's a link to it in the report for more detail. The cybersecurity recruitment pool looks at the volume of degree apprenticeships in, I think there are three approved cybersecurity degree apprenticeships that run across the UK that are DFE approved. And we've seen, I think they first started coming on board, I think in 2018, I think there's about 100 of them in 2018, not too many, but we've seen them increase from about 100, which again is very, very small across England, to 300 the following year, to about 1,000 now, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's jumped probably to close to 1,500 plus in the last 12 months. So it's still a very small part of the picture currently, but the proportional growth in degree apprenticeships has been really, really high. So I think there is a push. Certainly the public sector has a real role to play in this, because we've seen a lot of those, I say, job adverts for degree apprenticeships coming through public sector employers. We've seen organisations like the National Grid, the NCSE moving into offering degree apprenticeships. We've also seen some really big employers like BT doing the same as well. So I suspect as we see a number of those larger employers take on more of those roles, that's going to be good in terms of the supply picture. Some smaller employers might also do that, but I guess with degree apprenticeships, one of the really valuable things is that if you can get them brought into larger employers early on, then even if they leave those organisations, they're still likely to go on and to do other things with other organisations in future and help stem the gap at entry level. So it's a really, really interesting area that we're watching with scope. The other area is also around reskilling and retraining as well, where the data is a little bit worse for wear, because it's a very scattered landscape, if you will, because it's very hard to track people that are retraining. But certainly DCMS is doing an awful lot of work in funding and monitoring adult cyber security skills pilots and retraining pilots across the UK, which again, I think it's, as I mentioned, those inflows to getting more people into cyber, it's really all about recognizing that universities can only do so much, even if they want to increase supply. A number of those universities have 6, 7, 18-year-olds that are applying for the single course for computer science for cybersecurity. So universities, best will in the world, are growing their provision, but they can only do so much. But growing provision at undergraduate level, degree apprenticeship level, and retraining level is probably the only way that we're likely to kind of start to stem that gap.
Fascinating. Okay, well, Sam, thank you ever so much, and thank you for the questions that you've sent in as well. Hopefully we've been able to answer those during the course of this webinar. The slides will be sent out to all attendees at the end of the webinar. That was another question that did come through. But Sam, yes, I mean, I think your findings have been very profound, very interesting. It'll be interesting to track over the next few years, I think, what does happen and what movement is taking place. Clearly, there's a big need there for this. And, this is a very important and key piece of work, and I'm sure it's going to get even bigger as time moves on. We are going to be holding our next webinar, which twists very nicely into a similar line of topic, which is on the relevance of AI in the digital transformation of the UK labour market, which is on the 29th of September. So just over a week away. So please do, if you want to, sign up for that. Again, if you can't attend, then you can also pick up the recording afterwards. But that trusts to be a very interesting and informative webinar, I think, for everybody. But finally, just wanted to say thank you to our guest speaker today, Sam, for his enlightening information about the cybersecurity skills in the UK. Thank you to you for attending as well. I hope it's been of benefit. And we look forward to seeing you on a Lightcast webinar again very soon. Thank you very much.